My job is to deal with the evidence. In a way, it's my only job. That's the job. The job is evidence. The job is thinking. The job is ratiocination. The job is separating truth from untruth.
Subject, unknown knowns. That is to say, things that you think you know, that it turns out you did not.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're talking with Errol Morris. He's the Oscar-winning filmmaker whose great works include The Thin Blue Line from 1988, Mr. Death, 1999, Fog of War, Standard Operating Procedure, Tabloid from 2010, and his new latest movie, The Unknown Known, which is a long, fascinating conversation with Donald Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense and as such was directing our efforts both in Afghanistan and Iraq for a good chunk of the 21st century. Errol, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me on, but I'm not sure what I'm on.
Well, you know, turnabout is fair play, right? To use it in Terratron against the person who created it. But you are in the New York Times. You're writing a 4-part series of essays about Rumsfeld and about the themes explored in The Unknown Known. And that title comes from a famous kind of ditty that Rumsfeld gave early in 2003. And it was about kind of epistemology and of war. And you write that Rumsfeld's answer was a non-answer, not just an evasion or a misdirection. Many believe it was brilliant. I think otherwise. Why do you think otherwise?
For many, many reasons. Context, of course, is one of them. People, of course, forget about the context in which he first presented these ideas to the public. The context? 2002, we're planning a possible invasion of Iraq. A Pentagon reporter, the NBC correspondent Jim Miklaszewski, asks Donald Rumsfeld, what evidence do you have that Saddam Hussein is providing terrorist organizations with weapons of mass destruction? It's a very specific question. And it's a question about, guess what? Evidence.
Right.
The E word. What evidence do you have? Rumsfeld's answer, there's the known known, the known unknown, the unknown unknown. Another Pentagon reporter says, but that was not an answer to Miklaszewski's question. Rumsfeld says, well, evidence of absence is an absence of evidence, and so on and so forth.
So we're in a total Alice in Wonderland scenario here, right? Where I mean, there's a sense that Rumsfeld is not only not going to answer, but that he is going to kind of toy with reporters or with the American public, because this is the whole ball of wax, right? If Saddam Hussein is not producing weapons of mass destruction or consorting with terrorists, there's really no cause for action.
That's correct.
So how did Rumsfeld get away with this type of evasion, which early in early in Afghanistan and early in Iraq, his press conferences were about the biggest bit of must-see TV on a regular basis? Why did so many people seem to respond warmly to the fact that the Secretary of Defense, as we were in one war and entering another, evaded questions left and right?
You really want an answer?
At least the start of one.
We're all morons.
Mm-hmm.
You know how many people have said to me over the years, that known unknown stuff, that's really brilliant. This is, to use the big word, heavy man, epistemology, philosophy, blah, 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 blah.
Can I ask, for the New York Times, you did a series not too long ago, a series of short documentaries about why people should vote. If we're all morons, should we be voting?
Why not?
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask you, the Rumsfeld documentary, obviously...
Look, I don't know why people bought in to Rumsfeld's gobbledygook. Yes, I wrote a series of four-part series, which is up as we speak in the New York Times, on these ideas, call it the philosophy, if you like, of Donald Rumsfeld. I changed the title at the last minute. I was a little uncomfortable with the philosophy of Donald Rumsfeld. I changed it to the certainty of Donald Rumsfeld.
Right.
I object to the known known, the known unknown, for a whole number of reasons. One, of course, is the context in which he said it, which was avoiding the question that he had been asked by the Pentagon reporter, and a very, very important question about the nature of what evidence did he have to support a war. But I object to it on another level. The fact that it is hopelessly vague, maybe it's my epiphany, thinking about this concatenation of words, of the known and the unknown, that the important thing for all of us is not the known known, the known unknown. The important thing is fact and fiction, belief versus knowledge. I believe such and such. Is it a nonsensical belief or is it a true belief? And how do I separate one from the other? How do I determine what is real knowledge and that which is just belief? And I believe wholeheartedly that the whole thrust of Rumsfeld's so-called philosophizing is the devaluation of evidence. Instead of thinking about evidence and what evidence means, what evidence is there and what evidence isn't there, what can be supported and what can't be, what claim makes sense and what claim makes no sense, he instead drifts off into some kind of crazy meta-talk that is seemingly significant but is not. Does it mean we're all morons? It means we're all deeply gullible. We're all suggestible. We're uncritical at moments where we, in fact, should be.
Do you believe then that one of the things that is striking in the fog of war, Robert McNamara says, at a press conference you never answer the question that you're asked. You answer the question you want to answer. And I guess you would say that at least McNamara answered questions, whereas Rumsfeld, as you said, it's not even an evasion. It's not a non-answer. It's a total evasion. Do you think Rumsfeld had the answer to questions about weapons of mass destruction and chose not to give them because it would undercut his case? Or does he actually exist in a world where there is ultimately no evidence, only belief, only will?
You have addressed the central question of the movie. It is what the known and unknown, or in this instance, the unknown known, my movie is all about. It's all about that question, does he know and won't say? Does he even care to know one way or the other? Is he a salesman lost inside of his own ability to sell to the point where he's no longer reflective in any deep sense about what he's saying? I came to believe at the end of this whole process that he is a man who does not think clearly about things. Often he has this amazing capacity. I find it amazing. He has the capacity to say contradictory things seemingly without even realizing that they're contradictory. There's a famous line in a short story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Crack Up, and he says that the sign of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time. And I add in my essay, well, It's the ability to hold two opposing or contradictory ideas in the mind at the same time and know that they're contradictory.
Do you, one of the things that's fascinating about the movie is that Rumsfeld, writes an endless stream of memos that become known as snowflakes throughout the movie because there's so many. There's just a constant kind of blizzard of snowflakes being sent out to people, and he fixates on the definition, or the way that you talk about it is that he's obsessed with getting the exact definition of words, which obviously plays into the way that he handled the press and the media, and one assumes other countries. He would always fixate on the exact language, like a philosopher of language or a linguist, and by the end you had forgotten, or the idea is that you would forget what you were talking about or what the stakes were. In The Fog of War, Robert McNamara did the same thing with math. In your, fantastic movie, Mr. Death, about Fred Luchter Jr., who repaired electric chairs, you see a man who is grappling with the enormity of what he's doing for his job, and he becomes a Holocaust denier, and there's this massive search for evidence. Is there something about the work that these three people in your movies are in that forces them to leave the planet that they live on and only exist in a kind of astral plane of fantasy so that they don't ever have to confront themselves?
Luchter is a man who never has confronted himself and most likely never will. Robert McNamara is different in that respect. He's a man who actually has attempted to confront his past, and a man who lives, I believe, in a world of regret. Don Rumsfeld, far, far more like Fred Luchter than like Robert McNamara. I'm left with this deep feeling of his disconnection from reality. He argued with me. He didn't like the scene in my movie that shows his departure from the Pentagon. Well, he was fired. He was shown the door by George W. Bush. Literally shown the door. We see him getting a somewhat condescending pat on the back in the Oval Office and then being ushered out the door. Rumsfeld didn't like the scene because he said to me it made him look like he had left the Pentagon in disgrace. Well, okay. He wanted to see more of the heraldic ceremonies. He wanted to see the encomiums from Dick Cheney. He wanted to see the heraldry and regalia, the marching bands, the braid, the buttons, the medals. And me, my selfishness, my stinginess, I had failed to include all of it. But I didn't change the film. Even though I knew that he didn't like it. He didn't like that scene in it in particular. Perhaps we just differ. But I think there are a lot of people who would agree with me. You left the Pentagon in disgrace.
Well, does he
the war was one of the worst debacles in American history.
Does he understand that we lost, and not even to put it on these banal terms of win or lose, but that both Afghanistan and Iraq...
The world lost.
Exactly. I mean, does he...
Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. An entire area of the world was destabilized.
Does he have any sense of that? Or is he, no, actually things went, swimmingly well?
Well, that is indeed the question. If you're asking me, and of course you are asking me, I think his capacity to deny reality has become so great. Maybe no. If you find the right word, maybe we were victorious in Iraq. Maybe the world's a better place. I ask him this question, maybe it would have been better if we didn't go there at all. if you ask me what I believe, we would have been better if we didn't go there at all. This was a nightmare, an unproductive, destructive, stupid, senseless war.
And not one that is, the effects are far from over or even being concluded at this point.
Ongoing war, excuse me, I misspoke.
There was one moment, it seemed almost like a flicker of doubt, or if not doubt, something in Rumsfeld. At one point he did say, and I think it was after he tendered his resignation twice before it was accepted, and I think the second time was after the revelations of Abu Ghraib, which is a subject of where that happened or how that happened, the torture and abuse of prisoners in your documentary standard operating procedure. But at one point, Rumsfeld said, it would have been better if his resignation had been accepted. Did that surprise you that at some point he would acknowledge that, maybe it would have been better if he had been cashiered a couple of years earlier?
He says it in such a strange but characteristic way. He says that maybe it would have been better if he had left, that given that he's Secretary of Defense, in some sense he's responsible for what happened at Abu Ghraib, even though he really didn't cause any of that to happen.
Right.
So he takes responsibility and he takes no responsibility. I know, of course, even though he may deny it, that the enhanced interrogation techniques that he approved at Guantanamo, migrated to Afghanistan and Iraq, were used to justify horrendous abuse. The soldiers at Abu Ghraib, day one, arriving at the prison, saw nudity, hooding, stress positions, standing for long periods of time, all things that were specifically authorized by Rumsfeld in the Haynes memo that he endorsed. Who's kidding whom? I think he's kidding himself.
What do you do as a society? Both as a country, but then also what do you do? In a larger setting as a citizen of the world with this type of thing. And in the fog of war, at one point, McNamara grants that if America was defeated, in a way, he would be considered a war criminal. Obviously, Rumsfeld does not think that way. But how do we, what is the way to try to grapple with the enormity of the sense of delusion that is going on in, that you witness in Rumsfeld and, in a large way in the American government for, the better part of the 21st century?
It's scary because I'm an American. I love this country. I like to think that our democracy works after a fashion, that the people in power are thoughtful, responsible, rational. But that doesn't seem to be the case in this story. Seems to be otherwise, if not the opposite.
So Rumsfeld is gone. Rumsfeld left even before George Bush was ended his presidency. But since then we've had a continuation, and many people on the left and on the right talk about this. Under Obama, we had essentially a continuation of the war policies of George W. Bush. He tripled troop strength in Afghanistan and still pretends that his Afghan surge was a big turning point. He followed Bush's exit plan from Iraq and had his then Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, work overtime to try and extend troop stays in both Iraq and Afghanistan, generally unsuccessfully. Also, since, over the past year or so, basically because of Edward Snowden and a few other NSA leakers, we've learned that there is massive expanded surveillance going on under Obama, so that he's not only continued many Bush-era policies that are, extremely disturbing to say the least, but actually expanded them. He has a presidential kill list the New York Times reported, where he doesn't report to anybody why somebody's on it and if he can take them out or not. Do you feel comfortable, even with Rummy cashiered and now in the, lost in the fog of his own delusions, is America in better hands now? Or what is the way forward to actually try and pull some accountability to our leaders to speak honestly, openly, and transparently about how they're governing the country and how they're waging war in our name?
Do I think it's better or for worse with Barack Obama as opposed to George W. Bush? Better. Many people, including myself, hoped for a complete and utter transformation. And there wasn't one. There was a degree of continuity with the past. I'm one of those who believes that Barack Obama was saddled with a set of impossible tasks of trying to unwind so many, many, many bad policies and a disastrous economy which he inherited from George W. Bush, that what he actually can accomplish is severely constrained, severely limited. I'm glad he's in office. I think the country benefits greatly from his presence. I also feel, and in this sense I disagree with the Obama administration, that those figures in the Bush administration who led us to war under false pretenses, and I don't care whether they truly believe them or not. To me, that's not really relevant. They were false. They were false claims, and they should be held accountable for that fact. There seems to be, and maybe it's not a modern tendency, maybe it's a tendency through history, just to sweep the past under the rug and pretend it's not there anymore, or lifting up the acetate window on a magic slate and it all vanishes. I think that's a bad thing, not a good thing. I think we benefit, I truly believe we benefit by confronting our past in the hope that we can maybe not learn a lot about it or from it, but learn something rather than nothing. I have my own version of the Santayana quote. My more despairing version, Santayana said, those unfamiliar with history are condemned to repeat it. I say those unfamiliar with history are condemned to repeat it without a sense of ironic futility.
Well, speaking of discovering the past, perhaps, and this larger question of evidence in the world, because your films, and The Thin Blue Line is the movie that brought you to a very wide audience first, and that was about the reconstruction of events, where a man's life was held in the balance, a person accused of murder who was on death row. Your film intervened in talking about the evidence in that case, to such a degree that the person was ultimately freed. In A Wilderness of Error, your book from a couple of years ago, you talked about the Jeffrey MacDonald case, which became known as the fatal vision case, of a Green Beret doctor who was ultimately found guilty of murdering his pregnant wife and their other children after claiming a bunch of hippies had run in. It was made famous in a book by Joe McGinnis, who, along with Janet Malcolm and other journalists, became really the villains of your book, which is a fascinating deconstruction of false categories that are kind of used, whether it's being a psychopath or forensic evidence, that are used to convict people. Do you think we're in a particular era where evidence is held in absolutely low regard, or is this just simply the human condition?
Well, let's not forget that we as humans have created a vast amount of real knowledge. We have been successful, not always successful, but often successful, drawing a line between false belief and knowledge, between fact and fiction, between truth and untruth. If we have any claim to nobility, I think it comes from that. Does that mean that there are no longer problems? That people are capable of believing preposterous things, that our capacity to believe, our inherent credulity about things puts us at enormous risk? It does. I have had a career recording all kinds of stories over the years, stories about how people prefer untruth to the truth, stories about people who are blinded by their own spurious convictions, stories about false ideas. But in all of that, I have an unshakable belief in the truth. Maybe we can't always find it, maybe we can't always know it, but in principle, we can find it and we can know it, and that's our goal.
In a wilderness of error, you seemed, in your treatment of journalists in particular, of McGinnis and Janet Malcolm of The New Yorker, and McGinnis, of course, recently died, which I believe means that he can no longer be libeled. And I'll just throw that out there. But you suggest strongly that he actually changed the narrative.
Are you encouraging me to speak ill of the dead here?
Yes, I suppose I am. Or to speak honestly of the dead. You imply strongly, if not outright state, that McGinnis changed his narrative arc because that would be better for his book, that his publisher was pressuring him to, and this was before MacDonald was found guilty, to play the line that MacDonald was actually guilty when evidence was not as clear-cut. So that's one type of motivation to believe a falsehood or to spread a falsehood. With Janet Malcolm, in her book about Jeffrey MacDonald and the treatment, you take great issue with she seems to be much more interested in just telling stories, and that the internal logic of a story, of a tragedy or a comedy, is more important than its actual correspondence to events that might have happened. Is it worth drawing a distinction in these competing reasons for why people tell untruths, or is it just more important to recognize that truth is out there and we should be seeking it and we should be acting in good faith?
Both. There are a zillion reasons why people believe things that aren't so. I suppose I could create a taxonomy of false belief. This falls into that category, and that falls into some other category, and on and on and on and on. What disturbed me most about Fatal Vision, Joe McGinnis's account of the MacDonald case, is that he knew better. He represented evidence in one way on one occasion and represented it in the opposite way on another. That fact alone troubles me. If McGinnis committed a crime, now in Janet Malcolm's world, the crime was that he wasn't entirely honest with MacDonald. And then she goes into this whole deal about how all journalists betray their subjects, blah, 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 blah. I'll make several points really, really quickly, because I just don't want to belabor this at the moment. This is not about journalists and their subjects. In any human interaction, I don't care what it is, people withhold things. People misrepresent what they're thinking. People lie to other people. People deceive other people. And in some instances, people are kind to other people and loving to other people. There's a whole world of human relationships out there. McGinnis's crime to MacDonald was not that he didn't tell MacDonald, hey, I think you're a cold-blooded murderer, but I'm going to pretend you're a really nice guy, and I'm going to write a book that's going to exonerate you. Well, that's not nice. That's really, really pretty crummy. It's kind of Iago-like, two-faced. But that's not the crime. The crime is he ignored the facts and pretended they were different from what they were. And then Janet Malcolm comes along and tells you that facts may not matter. This is an alternative universe to the one I want to live in. I'm sorry. Facts do matter. There is a fact of the matter in that house on a military reservation in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Fort Bragg, in that house where Jeffrey MacDonald lived with his wife and two baby daughters. There's a fact of the matter. He either killed him or he didn't. And in principle, we should be able to find out whether it's A or B. And if we can't, we have to ask ourselves, why not? There's a real world out there. On the Thin Blue Line, a car was traveling down a deserted road in West Dallas. They hadn't turned on their headlights. Cops are at a Burger King. They see the car go by, a routine traffic stop. One of the police officers, the female police officer, stays in the car. The other gets out and is shot to death. Well, someone pulled the trigger. Someone had his hand on the gun and pulled the trigger. Cops got it wrong. And it can be proved that they got it wrong. They fingered the wrong guy. And our job is to figure out were there WMD in Iraq, yes or no? Not the unknown and some excursion into fanciful epistemology. Our job is to separate fact from fiction. My job in the Jeffrey MacDonald case, Janet Malcolm may say that she didn't care to look at all the folders of evidence. My job is to deal with the evidence. In a way, it's my only job. That's the job. The job is evidence. The job is thinking. The job is ratiocination. The job is separating truth from untruth. Okay, McGinnis was very naughty. He didn't treat MacDonald very nicely. He was a bad guy for that reason alone. But that's not the crime. And there's a crime here, a war crime, in the case of Donald Rumsfeld. The crime is the gobbledygook, the blizzard of words, the misdirections, the evasions, and even worse than that, the lack of thinking, and ultimately at the heart of all of it, at the bottom of all of it, is the disregard and the devaluation of evidence. Because guess what? It's all we have.
The movie, the documentary is dedicated to Roger Ebert. Can you explain why, and then also hazard a opinion? Is this a good time to be a documentarian?
Sure.
In the sense of, well, explain a little bit about your connection with Roger Ebert, and also, why it's a good time to be a documentarian.
No filmmaker ever had a better friend than Roger Ebert. He was an extraordinary good guy and a friend to me, and someone who will be missed, is missed. I made my first film, Gates of Heaven, years and years ago now. It was shown at the New York Film Festival in 1978, and there was a newspaper strike going on. So no one wrote about the movie. It was almost as if the movie had never been made. And then out of nowhere, really, unexpectedly, 2 Chicago critics started writing about Gates of Heaven. They were on television. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. They did one show, they did another show, they did a third show, and they did a fourth show. They wrote about it in their respective newspapers, the Sun-Times and the Tribune in Chicago. They became champions of me, my work, that movie in particular. I've often said to Roger Ebert, no Roger, no film career. My only problem with Roger was he loved Gates of Heaven so much, he put it on his list of the 10 best films ever made, that every time I made a movie and I showed it to him, I would say, how much less are you going to like this one to Gates of Heaven?
Can I ask, you did not simply admire him, though, because he gave you a hand up in your career or was instrumental. I mean, is there a lesson to be learned? One of the things that Ebert did, it seems to me, is that he democratized film criticism. He both took it seriously and he made it accessible to a wide variety of people who might not have thought critically about film. Is there a parallel in your work? Because, I mean, this is one of the reasons I ask, is it a good time to be a documentarian? In a way, it seems reality is more up for grabs than ever because more people can represent their perspectives on truth. And, you know, it's almost like a real-world Rashomon effect. But by the same token, we can get a clearer sense of what's really out there by kind of sifting through competing points of view and also recognizing that we're in conversation with people and we should try to reach some kind of overlapping agreement, if not unanimity, at least some kind of rough consensus as to what reality is, as to what quality is, as to what's important and what's not so important.
You're saying a number of contradictory things, though, because reality is not about an agreement between people. You know, I can decide that the Earth is flat with as many people as I choose to bring into the argument without really affecting the underlying reality that the Earth, in fact, is not flat. It's round or spherical or an oblate spheroid or however you want to describe it. It's odd. Rumsfeld tells us that Pearl Harbor was a failure of the imagination. You know, we hadn't imagined Pearl Harbor in advance of Pearl Harbor. What's interesting is that even at the time of Pearl Harbor, we had a glut of information.
Right.
We had enormous amounts of data. Radar had just come into existence. There were radar operators aware of the presence of something strange. The problem is, as the amount of data that we have available to us increases and increases and increases, does it bring us closer to the truth, or does it create an even deeper kind of muddle? And I would have to say the honest answer is I'm not sure.
It does seem that if you think about a movie like Fruitvale Station, which was nominated for some Academy Awards or talked about in that way anyway, you know, that's about a story where the police, you know, killed a kid and they told one authoritative tale, which was then debunked by essentially dispersed information gathering in the form of cell phone footage by people who witnessed it. So, I mean, it does seem like the documentarian's dilemma may be that because more people can tell their story because of technology, because of changes in things like that, we can get more multiple perspectives, but they should be focused on figuring out what actually happened as opposed to saying, okay, well, here's a truth that I want to live in without having to justify.
I think there aren't multiple truths. There's one, and we should go in search of it. And you asked better time for documentary filmmakers, of course. 30 years ago when I made my first documentary film, there was no independent cinema in this country. No distributors, no theaters. That's all changed.
What continuity in your work and Werner Herzog? Herzog has many movies that are about people who choose to live in a world of their own making that typically leads to disastrous results. Are you kind of doing the documentarian's version of many of his projects?
Well, I have been incredibly influenced by Werner over the years. When people ask me about my documentaries, I remind them, well, what tradition did I come out of? What were the documentaries that I saw as a young man at the Pacific Film Archive in Berkeley, California? Was it direct cinema, cinema verite? What was it? And often it was expressionistic documentaries. First and foremost among them were many of the early works of Werner Herzog. These are films that I loved then, I still love, and have been incredibly influential on what I do. We remain friends. I mean, he's still a close friend.
Well, we'll leave it there. I want to thank Errol Morris, the director of The Unknown Known, for talking to Reason TV about Donald Rumsfeld, about documentary film, and much, much more. Thank you, Errol.
Thank you.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.